Okay, let's kick things off with a question that, kind of keeps executives up at night. How is it that these massive, successful companies, we're talking titans of industry with all the smart people, all the money in the world, how do they keep getting lapped by tiny startups? It's a huge paradox, and we're going to unpack it right now.
I mean, seriously, think about it. They have every single advantage you could imagine, yet they constantly struggle to come up with the next big thing from inside their own walls. This isn't some new problem, but man, it is getting more and more urgent every day. So, what's the solution? Let's dive in. All right, here's our game plan. We'll start with this big corporate innovation puzzle. Then, we'll meet the hero of our story, the intrapreneur. We'll break down the 4 key ingredients that make them tick, figure out why their brilliant ideas often go nowhere, and then, get this, we're going to look at some lessons from Kenyan businesses. Finally, we'll tie it all together and see how to build a real ecosystem for innovation. So, first up, the corporate innovation puzzle. For any business out there, there is this constant nagging pressure to innovate, right? You have to keep moving forward to avoid stagnating, because the only other option is a slow, painful decline. The real question isn't if a company should innovate, it's how they can actually pull it off. And that right there leads us to the potential answer. It's a concept that's been bubbling up for decades, the intrapreneur. These are the people who can spark real change from the inside. They're basically the company's internal engine for growth, for reinvention. So what in the world is an intrapreneur? Well, the term was coined by Gifford Pinchot, and the definition is actually really simple. It's just a person who creates innovation of any kind, but they do it within an organization. They're not out there starting a brand new company, they're trying to transform the one they're already in. Now, this is where it gets really interesting when you put them side by side with a traditional entrepreneur. See, the entrepreneur, they're taking on all the personal financial risk. They're motivated by the dream of building something totally their own. The intrapreneur, though, they're an employee. They get to use the resources of the company they work for, and their motivation is a mix of independence and the rewards the company can give them. It's all about inventing inside an existing structure, not building a new one from the ground up. Okay, so we've got a handle on what an intrapreneur is. But what does this intrapreneurship thing actually look like when you're in the trenches? Well, let's break it down into its 4 core ingredients. Researchers Lumpkin and Des basically gave us the recipe. First, you've got innovation. That's the obvious one, right? Embracing new tech, new services. Then there's risk-taking. This is all about making those gutsy calls when you have no idea what the outcome will be. Third, proactivity. This isn't about playing catch-up. It's about seeing where the puck is going and leading the charge. And finally, and this one is so crucial, you have autonomy. This is the freedom, the breathing room for people to actually chase down an idea without getting tangled up in red tape. So if you've got smart people with these 4 amazing qualities, innovation should just happen, right? Well, this is where we hit the big problem. Because even with the absolute best people, good ideas die inside big companies all the time. Let's take a look at why. Just look at this number. This comes from a case study by Masa Temge Kafile, and it is absolutely staggering. Nearly 3 out of every 4 employees felt like top management just wasn't interested in their ideas. Can you just imagine the sheer amount of untapped potential in that number? If the people at the top aren't listening, the best ideas will never, ever see the light of day. This is probably the #1 killer of intrapreneurship. And it's never just one thing. That same study found a whole mess of internal barriers. As you can see, things like resistance to change, the sheer hard work involved, and having no clear process are the biggest culprits. But then you also have misunderstanding and just a culture of judgment. The key thing to see here is that it's a systemic problem. And if we dig a little deeper, we find what you could call hidden resistance. These are the unspoken reasons people push back on new ideas. Fear of the unknown, or people who are just comfortable and think, hey, we don't need to innovate. Sometimes it's just personality clashes, or the fact that there's no reward for trying something new. These are those powerful, invisible currents that can just drag a great idea under. Now, it's really easy to sit here and think this is all just an internal company problem. But check this out. Research from Michael Mustafa on small and medium-sized businesses in Kenya shows us that the external environment, what's happening outside the company, is just as critical. The context a business operates in really does shape everything. So the study found these 3 really powerful external forces at play in Kenya. First, there were really strong networks between businesses and a lot of social capital. Second, you had a dynamic economy and growing political stability.
And third, there's this national culture of collaboration called Harambe, which is basically a tradition of community self-help. It's awesome. So how does all that outside stuff affect what happens on the inside? Well, these external forces directly shaped how these companies set themselves up. They started investing way more in employee training to get the right skills. They developed a really sharp focus on the market to grab those emerging opportunities. And they got proactive about technology to stay ahead of the game. The outside world was literally forcing them to adapt internally.
And boom, that is the key insight. This perfect alignment where the external environment pushes and shapes the internal organization, that's what ultimately creates the fertile ground for corporate entrepreneurship to actually grow. See, it's not just about having a great idea. It's about your whole organization being perfectly tuned to the world around it.
So this brings us to the most important point of this entire explainer. If you want innovation to succeed, you can't just hire a few people you call entrepreneurs and just hope for the best. No, you have to build an entire ecosystem. I love this quote from Holt. It just says it perfectly. Intrapreneurship is a process that is affected and fed by organizational culture. Your company culture isn't just some side project for HR. It is the soil from which all innovation grows. And if that soil is toxic, it doesn't matter how good your seeds are. Nothing is going to sprout. So what's the big takeaway here? Real, sustainable innovation requires a complete ecosystem. That means you've got to build an internal culture that actually listens to its people, that tears down those barriers we just talked about, and that gives people real autonomy. And at the same time, you have to be constantly aligning that internal culture with the realities and the opportunities of the outside world. It's about building a living, breathing system, not just checking off a list of actions. And that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. After everything we've talked about, what do you think is the single biggest thing holding back innovation where you work? Really think about it, because just being able to answer that question, that's the first step to building a better system. Thanks for tuning in.